Today, we're going to break down a military doctrine that didn't just rewrite the rules of war, it literally weaponized the mind itself. The whole idea shifted. It was no longer about just destroying an enemy's army. It was about triggering a complete cognitive collapse inside their command structure. Victory became about psychological paralysis.
I mean, just put yourself in that situation for a second. It's a total nightmare. You spent months preparing for this big, head-on fight, a real test of strength. But that battle, it isn't happening. Instead, you look at the map on your table, and it shows you a catastrophe in the making. You're not in a fight, you're in a trap. And that feeling, that absolute disorientation, that is the entire point of the Pincer Blueprint.
So, to really get why this was so game-changing, you have to rewind. You have to look at the problem it was built to solve, the horrible grinding meat grinder that was World War I. The Great War was a stalemate machine. It was just attritional warfare, where winning meant slowly, painfully bleeding the other side dry in a hellscape of trenches. A new generation of military thinkers looked at that and said, never again.
What we're looking at here is a complete change in the philosophy of war, right? The old way was all about material destruction, counting bodies, counting shells. But this new doctrine, pushed by guys like Heinz Guderian, it targeted something else entirely: psychological paralysis. The objective wasn't just to beat the enemy army, but to completely shatter its ability to even function as an army.
So, what was the solution? It was this radical new doctrine, and it wasn't just about having cool new tanks or planes. No, the secret sauce was fusing them all together with the most important new piece of tech, the radio, to create one single, coordinated, lightning-fast weapon. This whole combined arms approach was designed for one thing and one thing only: to create and exploit chaos faster than the enemy could possibly think.
The name for this doctrine, as you probably know, is blitzkrieg. But lightning war is more than just about being fast. The key word here, the one you really need to focus on, is disorganization. By using radios to coordinate these rapid, focused attacks, you don't just outfight your enemy. You outthink them. You operate inside their decision-making loop before they even know what's happening. You completely shatter their ability to see what's going on, figure it out, make a decision, and then act on it.
So how does this all work on the battlefield? Well, it's a brutally effective three-step process. First up, the breakthrough. You don't attack the enemy everywhere. You find one single weak point, the Schwerpunkt, or center of gravity, and you hit it with an armored fist. You just punch a hole. Second, deep penetration. This part is absolutely crucial. The tanks, the armored columns, they don't stop. They just pour through that hole and race deep into the enemy's rear, cutting supply lines, phone lines, you name it. And finally, the third step, encirclement. Those spearheads that raced ahead, they swing back in towards each other, meet up, and snap. The trap is closed. You've just bagged entire armies in a huge pocket, leaving them cut off and completely confused.
And look, this wasn't just some theory they cooked up on a whiteboard. In the first few years of World War II, this blueprint was put into action with terrifying, devastating precision. They basically turned the military map itself into their primary weapon.
And the results, they were just staggering. Poland in 1939, that was the prototype. It proved the concept could work. But France in 1940, that was the masterpiece. The German panzers drove through the supposedly impassable Ardennes forest, completely bypassed the main French defenses, hit the English Channel, and sliced the Allied armies clean in two. And then in 1941, they took this same doctrine and scaled it up to a size that was almost impossible to imagine against the Soviet Union.
Just think about the scale here. In just the first few weeks of Operation Barbarossa, the Pincer movement near the city of Minsk trapped 300,000 Soviet soldiers.
And this wasn't some lucky shot. It wasn't a one-off. Right after that, at Smolensk, they did it again. They captured another 310,000. This became a repeatable, almost industrial process for just dismantling entire armies and wiping them off the map. So this is the key takeaway, right here. Taking territory was just a bonus. It wasn't the main goal. The real target was the enemy's nervous system, their command and control. If you can cut their phone lines, blow up their headquarters, and just create absolute chaos in their rear, you paralyze their ability to do anything. They might have more soldiers, more tanks, but if their leaders are blind and deaf, well, they're helpless. But here's the thing about any powerful strategy. It almost always has the seeds of its own destruction baked right in. A doctrine that's built on these high-risk, high-speed moves is, you guessed it, incredibly vulnerable if it ever loses momentum.
The fatal flaw of the pincer is actually its own success. As those armored spearheads drive deeper and deeper into enemy land, the supply line stretching back to them gets longer and thinner and way more exposed. The very aggression that makes the pincers so deadly is also what makes it so fragile.
And at Stalingrad, this weakness was exploited ruthlessly. While the German Sixth Army was completely bogged down in the city, totally overextended, with its flanks hanging in the wind, the Soviet Marshal Zhukov saw his chance. He took the Germans' own playbook and used it against them. He launched a massive pincer movement that slammed shut right behind the Sixth Army, trapping the trappers. Just like that, the hunter had become the prey.
Now, the collapse at Stalingrad was the massive turning point on the Eastern Front, for sure. But the legacy of the Pincer Blueprint was already set in stone. It had forever changed how we think about modern war.
When you boil it all down, what the Pincer Blueprint really proved was that the best way to beat an army isn't to destroy its body, it's to attack its brain. It turned warfare into a race to see who could mess up the other guy's decision-making process first. And that principle, that idea, remains the absolute core of how mobile warfare is fought to this very day.
Which, brings us to one last big question. In our world of constant satellite surveillance, real-time intel from drones, could a huge surprise encirclement like the ones we saw in 1941 even happen anymore? Or has all this technology made the fog of war so thin that the pincer just can't close the trap without being seen? That's a critical question for any modern strategist out there.